Hey everyone, welcome to a deep dive into what really makes a great team, you know?
hmm
We're going beyond those generic teamwork posters, you've
Yeah.
seen them,
Yeah.
and diving into Patrick Lencioni's The Ideal Team Player.
Okay,
He
well.
uses this really engaging story, like a
Yeah.
leadership fable,
Mm.
to explore the nitty-gritty of
Yeah.
what makes teams click.
What I find so compelling is that he sets it within a company so many people can relate to.
Right.
Even if you've never set foot on a construction site,
Yeah.
it's all about this fictional company called Valley Builders.
Okay.
And, while rapid growth is usually a good thing, they're facing this hiring crunch
I see.
that throws a wrench in the works.
Yeah, they need to hire something like 80 people in just 8 weeks.
Yeah, it's a crazy number.
For these two massive projects.
Yo.
And to make things even more intense, the company's financial stability is riding on these projects.
Whoa.
Talk about pressure.
Big time. Yeah, exactly.
And it's all happening under pretty dramatic circumstances.
Oh, yeah.
The new CEO, Jeff,
Mm-hmm.
has been thrust into the leadership role because his uncle, the previous CEO, has a sudden health crisis.
Oh, wow.
We're talking surgery, serious stuff requiring an immediate step down.
Wow.
So Jeff's dealing with the emotional weight of his uncle's illness.
Oh, yeah.
And the pressure of leading a company he's still getting to know.
That's a lot.
It's a classic thrown in the deep end scenario, and I think we've all felt that sense of overwhelm at work, even if the stakes aren't quite so high.
Definitely, yeah.
But Lencioni doesn't just drop us into this chaos.
Right.
He injects some humor into it, too.
Yeah.
Remember that scene with the senior employees pranking Jeff?
Oh, yes.
The one where they pretend they're going to quit because he got the CEO job instead of one of them?
Hilarious.
Exactly. And they use this phrase,
Yeah.
not a jackass, to describe their main criteria for a good teammate.
Yeah. How funny is that?
It's funny, but it reveals something important about their approach to teamwork.
Yeah, their definition of a team player is pretty superficial, right?
I think so.
It's more about who isn't a jerk,
Yeah.
rather than what qualities actually make someone great to work with.
Right.
And that's where Lencioni's 3 virtues come in.
Okay.
Humble,
Okay.
hungry,
Uh-huh.
smart.
Okay, let's break down those virtues.
Yeah, for sure.
Humble, we're talking about checking your ego at the door, right?
Yeah.
Valuing the team's success over individual glory.
It's more than just being nice.
Okay.
It's about being focused on we instead of me.
Got it.
A truly humble teammate shares credit readily,
Yeah.
doesn't hog the spotlight,
Mm-hmm.
and genuinely prioritizes the team's success above their own.
And hungry, I'm guessing that's more than just being a workaholic, right?
It's not just about clocking in the hours. It's about having a passion for the work,
Okay.
being self-motivated and
Right.
always eager to contribute.
Mm.
But it's a healthy kind of hunger,
Right.
not about burning yourself out or stepping on others to get ahead.
Yeah.
It's sustainable and directed towards the good of the team.
Makes sense. And finally, smart.
Yes.
Lencioni isn't just talking about book smarts or technical skills here, is he?
He's talking about interpersonal intelligence,
Okay.
about being savvy when it comes to navigating the complexities of teamwork.
Yeah.
So this includes being a good communicator,
Yeah.
understanding social cues,
Mm-hmm.
knowing how to build relationships,
Yeah.
and generally being someone who makes the team environment more positive and productive.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay?
And I bet this is where our listener will start to have some aha moments.
I think so, for sure.
Lencioni argues that it's not enough to have just one or two of these virtues.
Right.
It's the combination of all three that creates a truly ideal team player.
And this is where we get into those fascinating and often relatable archetypes.
Okay.
Because when a person is missing even one of these virtues,
Mm-hmm.
it creates a distinct type of teammate.
Right.
Some helpful, some not so much.
Yeah, like remember that project where you felt totally invisible?
Uh-huh.
Like you were doing the work but just blending into the background?
That's the pawn archetype.
Okay.
Humble, yes, but without
you-
the hunger and smarts to really stand out or make a significant impact.
I see.
They're present, but not necessarily impactful.
And then there's the opposite of problem.
Okay.
The teammate who's all hunger and very little of the other two.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about the bulldozer, right?
Yeah.
All action,
Yeah.
no finesse.
Yeah.
They might get things done, but they leave a trail of destruction in their wake, running over people's feelings and creating unnecessary conflict.
We've all worked with the bulldozer at some point.
At least one, I'm sure.
And then there's the well-intentioned teammate who creates chaos without even realizing it. I'm thinking of those folks who just don't quite get social cues or how their actions impact others.
Right, the accidental mess maker.
Yeah.
Humble and hungry, they genuinely want to contribute, but their lack of smarts leads to misunderstandings, awkwardness, and sometimes even hurt feelings. They trip over their own good intentions, basically.
Ouch. I know a few accidental mess makers.
Yeah, me too.
And how about the lovable slacker? Everyone likes them, they're pleasant to work with, but their lack of hunger can really drag a team down.
Yeah, this archetype highlights the danger of prioritizing likability over productivity. Even though they're not actively causing harm, they need constant prodding to get things done. Their lack of follow-through can become a burden for the rest of the team.
And then there's the one that's maybe the hardest to spot, the skillful politician. They're charming, ambitious, and seem like they're all about teamwork until you realize they're using those skills for their own agenda.
This one's fascinating because they can be incredibly effective, especially in the short term. They're hungry A&D smart, but that lack of humility means they're ultimately playing the game for themselves, often at the expense of others. It's a subtle form of manipulation that can be hard to recognize until it's too late.
Have you ever worked with someone who seemed great at first, but then turned out to be, well, a nightmare?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes these archetypes so valuable. They give us a framework for understanding those difficult teammates we've all encountered. And even though Lencioni's book focuses on hiring, it's incredibly useful for understanding the dynamics of existing teams, would you say?
Totally. Thinking about your current team, can you identify any of these types? No need to answer out loud, but I bet you're already picturing a few faces. And that brings us back to Valley Builders. Remember, they need to hire 80 people and fast.
Yeah, and Jeff, the new CEO, is trying to apply these humble, hungry, smart principles to the hiring process, but it's not as easy as it sounds. He's realizing that finding people who truly embody all three virtues is incredibly challenging, especially when you're under pressure to hire quickly.
It's easy to say we only want humble, hungry, and smart people, but in the real world, you rarely find perfect candidates. So how does Jeff balance his idealism with the practicalities of hiring?
Well, Lencioni provides some really practical advice on how to spot these qualities during the interview process. He emphasizes going beyond those typical surface-level questions like, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses.
Right. Those are so generic.
Exactly. Instead, he suggests asking questions that reveal a candidate's character. Things like, describe your most embarrassing career moment, or tell me about a time you failed. It's about seeing how they handle those tough situations, how they take responsibility.
So it's less about the specific answers and more about the underlying attitude.
Exactly. Are they comfortable admitting mistakes? Do they have a growth mindset, a willingness to learn from their experiences?
He also suggests asking candidates to describe how other people would perceive them, like how would your previous boss describe your work ethic? Or would your colleagues say you're a humble person?
Oh, that's good. I like that one. This is a brilliant tactic because it forces candidates to step outside their own self-perception and consider how their behavior impacts others. It reveals a lot about their self-awareness, which is a key component of that smart virtue.
And Lencioni also gets creative with the interview setting. He suggests taking candidates out of that formal office environment and observing them in more casual settings. Things like running errands together or having lunch at a busy restaurant.
Yeah, just to see how they act in a more relaxed setting.
Exactly. It's about seeing how they treat the wait staff, how they interact with strangers, how they handle those everyday situations where they might not be on guard or trying to impress a potential employer.
Yeah, you can learn a lot about someone by how they treat people in those situations.
And this might sound a little woo-woo, but Lencioni also encourages hiring managers to trust their gut. If something feels off about a candidate, even if you can't quite put your finger on it, don't dismiss that intuition.
Oh, I totally agree with that. Sometimes you can just sense that someone's being a little too polished or rehearsed, even if their answers are technically perfect. It's about paying attention to those subtle cues that might reveal a lack of authenticity.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a feeling.
Get a vibe.
He also suggests being upfront with candidates about the company's expectations. Tell them straight up that being humble, hungry, A&D smart is non-negotiable in your company culture.
Yeah, I like that. It's almost like a filter, right? If a candidate is genuinely committed to those values, they'll be excited by that challenge.
Yeah.
But if they're not, they might just self-select out of the process, which can save everyone a lot of time and heartache.
So Jeff is trying to implement all of this at Valley Builders, but it's not going as smoothly as he'd hoped. In fact, he's facing some pushback from his team. They're worried he's being too picky, that he's setting the bar too high.
And they have a point, right? Nobody's perfect. Can
Yeah.
you really expect to find 80 people who embody all three virtues to the same degree?
It's that classic tension between idealism and pragmatism. You want to build a team of A players, but you also have to work within the constraints of reality.
Exactly. And Jeff is starting to grapple with that tension. He's questioning whether he's taking this ideal team player thing too far.
That self-doubt creeps in, right? Especially when you're facing resistance from people you respect. I think we can all relate to that feeling of, am I being too idealistic? Am I setting myself up for disappointment? So how does Jeff resolve this inner conflict? How does he convince his team that sticking to these virtues is the right approach, even under pressure? So we left off with Jeff kind of wrestling with this tension. Can he hold on to these ideal team player principles while also navigating the very real pressure to hire quickly? It's easy to talk about virtues in theory,
Yeah.
but when you're facing a real-world crisis, it's tempting to just grab whoever you can get, right?
Absolutely. And this is where Lencioni gives us a really powerful example of how Jeff uses the humble, hungry, smart model to analyze a specific situation at Valley Builders. It involves two employees, Nancy, a project manager, and Craig, a foreman who's been with the company for a while.
Okay, so from what I remember, they identify Nancy as being humble and hungry, but she seems to be lacking in the smart department. She's dedicated, hardworking, but maybe not the most, shall we say, socially adept.
Right? She misses those subtle teamwork cues and often creates unintentional conflict.
Oh, that's tough.
And Craig, he's sort of the opposite. He's incredibly smart when it comes to people clearly hungry to contribute. But there are some questions about his humility. Maybe a bit too eager to take charge, a little less inclined to share credit.
Okay, so you've got these two employees, neither of them perfectly embodying all three virtues. What does Jeff do with this?
Well, this is where the model moves beyond just hiring. It becomes a tool for understanding and developing existing team members, even those who might not be perfect, ideal team players. Jeff decides to use this framework to really assess Nancy and Craig to see if understanding their strengths and weaknesses through this lens can help him make better decisions about their roles.
I like that. It's not about finding people who check all the boxes.
Right.
It's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique blend of strengths and weaknesses and figuring out how those fit into the bigger picture.
Exactly. And it's about creating a culture where those differences are acknowledged and addressed in a constructive way. So with Nancy, Jeff decides to have a very honest conversation with her. He explains the importance of the humble, hungry, smart model and asks for her perspective on where she fits in.
Okay, so it's not a reprimand.
Oh,
It's more of a guided self-assessment, giving her a chance to reflect on her own behavior and see where she might need to grow.
Precisely. And with Craig, the discussion centers around whether his hunger and smarts are enough to outweigh any potential concerns about his humility. It's about recognizing that sometimes a slight imbalance in one virtue can be offset by strengths in the other two.
It's like a balancing act, right? You're
Yeah.
weighing those virtues, seeing where the strengths lie and where the development opportunities are. But I imagine this is a delicate conversation to have with someone, especially someone like Craig, who seems to be a high performer.
It definitely takes a skilled leader to navigate those conversations effectively. And Lencioni emphasizes that this approach isn't just for problematic employees. It's valuable for everyone on the team, even those who seem to embody all three virtues.
So even with those ideal team players, there's always room for growth. It's not like you reach some perfect state and then coast along.
Exactly. It's not about achieving some static state of perfection. It's about continuous improvement, both individually and as a team. And one of the most powerful ways to facilitate that growth is through peer coaching.
So teammates helping teammates, how does that work in practice?
Lencioni suggests having team members who are particularly strong in one virtue mentor those who are working to develop that same virtue. For example, someone who's naturally humble could mentor someone who's struggling with ego or taking credit for others' work.
I can see how that would create a culture of mutual support and accountability. Everyone has something to offer, even if they're not the ideal teammate in every way. And they also have something to learn from others. It's like a virtuous cycle. But I'm curious what happened with Nancy and Craig. Did these conversations make a difference?
They did. Jeff continued to work with Nancy, giving her opportunities to develop her interpersonal skills and become a more well-rounded team player. And he ultimately decided to promote Craig, recognizing that his strengths outweighed his weaknesses, but with the understanding that he needed to continue working on his humility.
So it's about recognizing potential and providing opportunities for growth, even if someone isn't the perfect package right away. Did this approach have a broader impact on the culture at Valley Builders?
Absolutely. As Jeff consistently applied these principles, the culture at Valley Builders began to shift. By openly addressing these virtues, praising those who exemplified them, and addressing issues directly when they arose, he created an environment where people became more self-aware and held each other accountable.
So it sounds like it was a gradual process, but ultimately, those conversations and that consistent focus on the humble, hungry, smart model started to pay off.
Yes, and the company saw positive results as their teamwork became more cohesive and productive. People started to internalize those values and see how they contributed to a more positive and successful work environment.
That's a great example of how a leader can actually shape the culture of a team, not just by talking about values, but by putting them into action, by having those sometimes difficult conversations, and by creating systems that support those values.
And that brings us back to Lencioni's core message, right? It's not just about finding the ideal team player. It's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive, where individual strengths are maximized, and where teamwork becomes a natural and rewarding way of working.
It's an ongoing journey, not a destination. There will always be challenges and setbacks moments where we question whether it's all worth it. But this deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. How do my own teammates measure up? And how can I, as a leader, foster these virtues within my own team?
Those are great questions for all of us to reflect on. And as you continue to explore this topic, remember that building an ideal team is a process, not an event. It takes time, effort, and a commitment to those core virtues: humility, hunger, and smarts.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of ideal team players. Thanks for joining us.